able to join us today. We have a very special guest. We're talking about missions in the city today, and we're focusing on a World Venture Partner Church, Salem First Baptist. Mark Hanke, Pastor Mark Hanke, is a board member at World Venture, and he's the head pastor. So, Mark, is there anything else you want to introduce about yourself in that?
No, father of or husband of Carrie, and father of four children. Three of them are married, seven grandchildren.
Awesome, awesome. So tell me about, in your bio and that you sent to me, you had a very interesting line in there that I just couldn't resist on asking you. Tell me about your lunch with President Ronald Reagan and singing with the Carpenters.
Yeah, uh, yeah. Those are. Whenever I play that game, two truths and a lie, I always use these, and no one ever guesses it. So when I was I'll start with the Carpenters. When I was a young kid, I sang in a lot of different venues and stuff. And so when the Carpenters, Richard and Karen, did a tour, they toured with a small group of kids that did a couple of their songs with them. And so they invited me to join that. And that's how I sang with the Carpenters. We would be, brought out on stage, we'd sing, we'd go back. And,
Oh, wow.
it was the first two or three, you realize you don't even see an audience member because the lights are so bright. But it was actually it was amazing, honestly. Yeah, they were fun. So very kind. Both of them just extremely kind people. So that's what I did with the Carpenters. Reagan, I was in high school and Oregon did. I was in Oregon at the time for high school. And we we did a thing. It's called that year is the Mock Republican Convention, and so each of the high schools in the state that participated took a state, and so we represented, for example, our school represented Iowa, and so the chairman of each of those, and I was chosen to be a chairman, got to have lunch with Ronald Reagan. So me and about 50 of my best friends.
That's still something, though. I mean, when you're able to have lunch with the president of the United States,
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
still quite an honor, even if there are 50 of you.
Yeah, it was
Um,
before he was president, but it was the
oh,
election year. It was the election year, so
election year.
it was fascinating, honestly. Yeah, again, very personable. I mean, it was like you were kind of like, wow, this guy's really running for the president. And he was a governor, and he became president, and but he seemed to me like the real deal.
Yeah, awesome. So Mark and Lynn Schmidt from Mozambique say hi. And
Hi, Roger and Lynn. Good to see you guys.
so, what brought you to Salem First Baptist? How long have you been serving at that church?
I'm in my 16th year. When I graduated from seminary, I wanted to plant churches, and I thought that's what I was going to do. But I entered into a church that was older, declining. The first one was an inner city church, and God enabled us to learn some things about turnaround. It's not a real popular sport. In fact, most people really don't want to do it. It's actually got some challenges. And then I went to a church that was 125 years old, and God did the same thing. It was just remarkable up in Fort Collins, some of the work that God did. And so this church here that I'm in was a longstanding church. It had its peak in the 50s, in 60s, I think it was. It was currently, when I came, pretty infected, a lot of mistrust, a lot of theological, relational tensions. And so they asked me if I would consider, and I turned them down for a while because I thought I was in heaven in Fort Collins. But in time, God became really clear. And so it's kind of interesting. That's been our lot in life, is to go to older, declining, what I would usually say is infected, lost mission churches,
Mm,
and see God give them a new day.
that's awesome, and that's not an easy thing to do.
No.
But that's awesome. So, what, in your experience as a pastor and World Venture board member, are the obstacles pretty? Yeah, what kind of obstacles do you see in Salem, Oregon? What are the obstacles to the gospel there?
Well, oh, there's a lot of them. I'm going to say very currently there's the obstacle of churches are trying to figure out how to relate to the larger culture and the larger political and sociological, if you will, mistrust and fights. Um,
Mm,
and some churches are entering in that almost in a nationalistic way. Other churches are avoiding it in ways that may be irresponsible. So,
mm,
one is just the obstacle of we have culture clashes that we used to not have. Um, and then I think another one is dealing with the fact that the church, if you go back to the early 80s, and so we were talking about the moral majority, and we were going to have a say, and we were going to have an influence, and all of a sudden now we realize we're not even in a majority, and we're generally not even invited to the table of culture. And so trying to figure out how to live as a church being marginalized or even not recognized is really
yeah.
causing, I think, a lot of people, leadership in particular, angst and fear. So I would say that's a big one. And then we used to, back in the 80s, have worship wars. Every church kind of had this, what are we going to do with worship? And I find that honestly, I would long for the day that we only had one war. Now we have about 20,
Yeah.
and they're over political issues, they're over gender issues, they're over a score of things. And so there's just a whole lot more mistrust in leadership. And so those are challenges that feel fairly current to me that maybe weren't in the early years of my pastoral life.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely see that. In fact, there's a book called Hope for Nations that came out several years ago by John Dickerson, and that spoke about how the church is going into, I think he called it a post-Christian era.
Yeah,
And that's pretty hard when we enjoyed being the majority, and now we've got to earn trust. I mean,
yeah,
similarly to just like mission, our global workers around the world, they've got to earn trust in the culture they're in, and so we're in that position. It feels like.
yeah.
So, in your, if in your experience, if you've been to other urban areas, are the obstacles similar there as well? Thinking about missions in the city and
Yeah, I think they are. No matter where you go in the city, you have certain, you have issues, you have restriction of land, you have city problems. We have all kinds of homeless issues around us every day. Um, we have had myself. I had a knife pulled on me not too long ago. One of our security guards got decked and put in the hospital, and so we have city issues. We have all kinds of meth and mental issues every day. We have a school, and we have to, kind of put shades on the windows so that our kids don't see somebody defecating and/or, frankly, just changing their clothes. And then you got resource issues. To be honest with you, wealthy people tend to migrate towards suburban areas, not urban areas. And so you have just kind of context wealth issues. I have a friend who's pastoring in a city situation, and he's really a missiologist. And candidly, I think terribly misunderstood in his church. They kind of consider him woke. I don't think he is. I think the guy is simply a brilliant missiologist, but his church has changed, turned over two-thirds. I mean, it's just unbelievable what has transpired. And what has left is predominantly wealth, and what has returned or come is refugees and people of, that don't have a lot of money. And so, in one sense, he's pretty happy. On the other sense, it's a great challenge when you have a ton of money walk out the door, and you're still left with the challenges that you face.
oh man, yes. So through your webs, oh, looks like Shelley Stansfield joins us with a question. Why does the verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book preaching disappear in churches these days? And how do pastors get back to this? Is not God's truth still truth? Are Christians running for local political sources? Just asking.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that last one. I think if you go back and just trace preaching, in the 80s, we were talking about relevancy, and you had conferences on biblical relevance, and preaching became very topical, very therapeutic. And that went all the way through the 90s, and that became steeped, and the average sermon was probably 6 to 8 weeks at most. I remember G. Campbell Morgan preached through the book of Romans, and it took him 10 years. No one has a stomach for 10 years, sermon series right now. And so what happens is people are looking for shorter vignettes, shorter sermons, and very therapeutic. There is a wave, I believe, moving back. Book. I'm not so sure I'm a fan of the verse by verse, and that's a way bigger story to untackle. But I am a very, very strong proponent of. I'm in the Gospel of John right now. We're just preaching through the Gospel of John. We preached through last year 1 Corinthians. That was a blast. There's more hornet's nests in 1 Corinthians than you can imagine. So I think that there is a wave coming back, but it's coming out of the 80s and 90s, which put a huge emphasis on relevance, therapeutic, deism, and a score of other things. So, but I would say I'm hopeful.
Awesome. Helen Rayfield says, hi from Phoenix. Thanks for performing our wedding 11 years ago.
Yeah, what a blessing to see Helen's name. Oh my goodness. Hi, Rayfields. Yeah, that's awesome.
And just as a reminder, everyone, you can feel free to leave comments, questions, and all that as we talk. So let's go into, I was able to go through your amazing website. I really loved it. I loved how user-friendly it was, how many resources are available just on a click. But I noticed that you have some awesome resources for people who are struggling with marriage, addictions, sexual integrities. You have support groups. Can you share maybe a couple positive impact stories of how God has used your church through the Center for Health and Healing that you've created?
Yeah, that is absolutely a thrill for us, honestly. Partly it is given people who are facing some of the biggest challenges of their life. Within our church, for example, we have, I think, 3 or 4 families that I can think of that their children are entering into transgender journey. And to walk in and have people not judge you for, it's like you must have done a poor job as a parent or whatever, whatever happened, but rather just say, hey, what you're facing is the greatest challenge of your life. There's this part of you that feels like your daughter is dying, right in front of you as she lives. And so it's given an open door for people. We're not, in that sense, affirming of that journey. We're simply very affirming of those parents. And so we're trying to tackle things, sexuality, gender transfer, economic issues, how to survive in a local public school. Our schools out here are having little parties in the 2nd and 3rd grade for kids that have decided to transgender. And so parents are scared to death, and they're like, man, this place is, is going to destroy my children. And so we have classes like that. It's open to the entire city. So it's just given permission for people who are facing huge challenges to have support, to learn, to grow, and to encourage each other. It's been remarkable.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know that that is a question that a lot of churches are just struggling to answer, is how they are able to make an impact in culture that way. And it's an interesting twist you have on how to survive public schools. But that is alarming. There's no kind of parties they're having. So tell me about how many you seem like you're a pretty healthy church. You seem like you're have a lot of ability to do these things. What kind of many of our country's churches are kind of smaller with limited resources and volunteers. especially too, they're dealing with congregation members who are divided on the topic and who may take it more politically than take it as a mission. What kind of advice would you give to these churches? What can you recommend on how to help those that struggle with mental health? Because that is such a stigma sometimes.
Yeah.
Trauma, anxiety, LGBTQI plus issues, etc.
Well, when I came, our church had a lot of theological fights. We had fights over education. Were we going to be a church that supported homeschool, Christian school, public school? And I gave him a phrase, and I've lived with this phrase all my life. A dog in the kennel nips at his fleas, but one on the hunt doesn't even know they exist. And I have in many ways lived by that motto. If you take your church and you lead them to a place, even about trying to develop community and all of those things, you're probably not going to get very far. But if you identify that which is broken, that which needs the gospel, and you lead them onto the mission, you find an amazing ability to get a lot accomplished with people who may have some significant differences. But when they're on mission, those differences seem to dissipate and almost remove themselves. So, my first advice to any city church that is going to face huge challenges is look around, open your eyes, and say, what is it that we see in our community that we have the capacity, because of God's grace and kindness, to address? And we took our VBS. We had a VBS, Vacation Bible School, that had 75 kids to it. And to be honest with you, half of them were our kids and half of them were for kids from other churches where parents just found really good babysitting.
Oh, man.
And so what we did is we turned that into a sports camp, and then we turned it into a skills camp. This year we had 600 kids. And we had kids focusing on hip hop. We had kids focusing on robotics. We had kids focusing on woodworking. We had kids focusing on art, on dance, all kinds of things. And then we teach the gospel just like a VBS, but we do it in the context of where kids want to hang out and be. We have to literally put limits on that thing. And we didn't start that overnight. It didn't just go to 600. It's grown. But when we open that thing in April, it's almost filled by middle of May.
Wow.
And we don't even do it till June or July. The same thing with our basketball program, Upward. We started it last year. We had 900 kids in it. And we're actually partnering with other churches. We lead it, but we partner with them. It's simply finding out what is it that our city needs. Where is the brokenness? We have broken families. We have families who have just completely upside down views on sports. And so we capture that and say, you know what, we get to be a voice into that. And by God's grace, our city has responded to it. It's marvelous.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a comment on from someone who's watching. Roger says, proclaiming the gospel with a language people are willing to listen.
Yeah, it's really good. And I don't think that's caving to culture. I think it's like, we have families who love their kids but don't know how to raise them with a good sports ethic. Or we have families that, when we did our VBS and moved it, we started off as a sports camp, and then we decided, there's a lot of kids that just don't like sports. And that's okay, but they love robotics and they love art and they like woodworking, and frankly, they like hip hop. And, I think hip hop's kind of crazy. When I go in and start, dancing, they all laugh. But the reality is, you're right. It's the language of the people. To be quite honest with you, I've learned that more from WorldVenture missionaries than I've learned it from anyone.
Awesome.
They are some of the best missiologists I have ever been around. And I try to think in my locale like I've seen Roger think in Mozambique, like I've seen a score of the Betchers think in a country I won't name. I'm simply really trying to reenact what I've learned from them.
Awesome. Yeah, in social media where I serve, basically we have the same kind of thinking, knowing your audience. And the same thing in the city is just in whatever town you're in is knowing your audience. So can you share a little bit, maybe some personal impact of the Upward Basketball League, that you've started?
Yeah, it's everyone wants to know kind of your ROI on every ministry that you're doing. What's the return on investment? And um, there's a number of things about it, but probably the thing that I get most excited about. So every one of our head coaches is a Christian, and by intention, we try to have every one of our assistant coaches be a non-Christian. Number two is every one of our coaches is taught how to share the gospel. Last year, we had, I think it was somewhere in the vicinity of 57 kids pray to receive Christ for the first time.
Mm.
The vast majority of them were led by a coach who had never led anyone to Christ ever. And I mean, I'm excited for the kids, but the fact that you have all of these coaches that are learning how to share the gospel, there are a lot of them are dads. And so, we have this idea that parents are going to disciple their kids at home. And I don't mean to, be a naysayer, but most of them actually don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
They really don't. They don't know how to develop a systematic kind of sequential development of the character and the heart of their children. And so we teach all of these dads and moms how to share the gospel and how to connect with their kids and how to disciple these kids. And so every year, for the first time, we have 20, 30, 40 coaches that lead somebody to Christ for the first time. It's the most exciting thing to me in the world.
Awesome. And discipleship and basketball, and everyone loves basketball. So,
Yeah.
So how did during COVID, some churches shut down and other churches had to scramble to mobilize. And how did your church mobilize to still meet in person during the COVID shutdowns? How did you do that? And what other resources and outreach did you do during this time to continue your mission to the city?
Yeah, I think I'm more proud of our staff in that season than I've ever been in my life. We took a couple of months off like everyone else did. We didn't know what, COVID was. We didn't know if we were dealing with Ebola or, whatever the case, may be. So we shut down. But when we found out kind of what it was, we started back up, I think 6 to 8 weeks afterwards. They gave us permission to be outside. So we went outside. We had services in our parking lot for I think 5 months, and we're in Oregon, where it rains a lot. But we met, and our church rallied to that like you wouldn't believe. They thought it was the best thing in the world. We had to buy a lot of pies for some of our neighbors that were a little offended by our music, but we made it through that. When the winter came and we couldn't be outside anymore, we did something that I think was about as creative as you can imagine. I preached 7 different times every weekend because we had limitations on how many people you could have in each room. And it's just simply an incredible moment. I would start preaching in one service and we'd have 2 worship teams and other services. And then I would flip and we would just the entire Saturday night, Sunday morning was this ongoing rotation to get in over 1,000 people. And so, but our church did it. We had a guy that was on a timer and he would come up and say, Mark, you have 2 minutes and you're on. And I'd be walking from one service to the next. And so we had a program director and we had streaming, and our staff was beyond amazing. And our church, they so deeply appreciated our effort. It was some of our church's best days ever.
Wow, that is amazing and very creative. If you all look into the chat, I have put in the link to Salem First Baptist. They have also, I would encourage you to go to their YouTube account. They've got some interesting videos there. So in all that creativeness and all that keeping that time and keeping everything going, as a church team, how did you keep your strength up together? Because I'm assuming it must have been extremely stressful to punch in that much ministry.
Well, I think when when you're in battle, to be honest with you, I mean, it's like when you're really intensely in battle, there's a lot of things actually that you kind of normally did that gets pushed off. It's like, okay, we're down to the core, pulling off weekends and discipling people and handling situations. And so there was a sense of which things got really focused. We didn't do quite as much, maybe. But I think the other thing is it's just invigorating, utterly invigorating to work with a team of people who are unified.
Mm.
It's a kindness of God, but we had not 1 ounce of fracture at our leadership level on how we responded to COVID, how we viewed it, how our church can minister through it. We had no internal disagreement. It was unbelievable and just a gift from the Lord. So it was marvelously invigorating to me. Frankly, we have a number of businesses as well as our church, our daycare. Our daycare stayed open as a service kind of to our community for first responders and others. And then we have a First Lube is a lube center where we change oil in cars and everything else. We hire guys exclusively who have come out of prison. That was
Mm.
open every day. So honestly, I was down at the office virtually every day. I never had one day where I, kind of sheltered at home because we had businesses that were open and I wasn't going to let those guys work without me. So I was down here every day with them.
That is an awesome example of leadership from you. And from as I've gotten to know you through the summit when we streamed that, we really enjoyed your talk and everything during that. So let's let you know you're incredibly creative. Your church is incredibly creative. So tell us about First Loop Plus. Let's start with that, and then the difference that made in the community. You've gotten so many different buildings and so many different things going on,
Yeah.
but let's start with that.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Out of something that we're downtown. We don't have a lot of off-street parking, and we found out that we had a free lease with another building, and it was going to get sold possibly, and we didn't know, and so we had to purchase another block, and it came available to us. We purchased it. It happened to used to be a car dealership, and it had some office space, and then it had this lube center. And so we looked at it and thought, you know what, we can tear that thing down, but it's probably got about, two to $300,000 worth of equipment. And so it's like, why tear that down? Let's go find a manager and hire guys out of prison. I've had an ongoing, every year I try and pick up a prisoner that is getting ready to get out in a year. And I talk with them on the phone every week. I spend time with him. And then I sponsor him when he gets out. And I just help him transition into our community. So I've been doing that. It's an easy thing to do. Doesn't take a lot of time. The impact is beyond is super. So I thought, let's expand this thing. And so we just hire guys out of prison and we teach them how to show up to work. We buy them all their clothes. We buy them all of their, furniture. We put them in an apartment and we ask them to work with us for a year. If they leave, they leave. Most of them don't. Um, we help them go before court. We get rid of some of their fines. Sometimes we even pay them off. And then after a year, our goal is to transition them to one of our partnering businesses that hire them and candidly usually pay them double what we're paying them. So they make all kinds of money. Um, but we've had some failures. We've had some guys recidivize back into drugs. We've had some
Mhm.
guys do some things, but we've also had a ton of success. We've had guys that were 13 years, 10 years in prison come out and they're out and they're doing well. Some of them are married. And so it's a pretty spectacular thing. We tell the city. And so we just try and get as many people to come to there as we can. But that's one of the businesses that we run.
And you've got others. You bought a building on the coast. I think that's a youth building that you bought.
It's a retreat center. It's actually bought before I came, but we just finished it's a retreat center, houses about 65 people, and it is used on average 180 nights a year. to the tune of about 5,000 to 6,000 people that use it every year. And it's for discipleship. It's for family reunions, honestly. Families, it's very affordable. We just put about $500,000 of renovation into it, and we have vision for future things. When I came to Salem, it was for sale. They thought, we're going to sell it. But we've kind of revisioned it, put a lot of money into it. It's an unbelievable retreat center. It's 2 miles north of Newport. Beautiful area, right on the beach. It's incredible.
Yeah, if you guys go take a look, everyone, if you take a look at their website, their YouTube account, you can kind of see some of that. It does look incredibly beautiful. So tell me about how have you seen, because you mentioned positive, how discipleship makes a positive impact through employment. So how have you seen disciple making, either one-on-one, your programs that you got, make a positive impact on the community itself, those that don't actually walk into the doors of your church?
Well, I think one is disciple making turns people into missional living. That's kind of my ultimate goal, is to not just inform a person, but to turn them into a person that looks at their city the way I look at my city. I think of the Pearsons. I was in Austria years ago, and here's a family that I don't think they had any of the kids at home, and they had a van. And I was like, "What do you have a van for?" And they said, "We have a van, so that we can take kids in the flat that we live in to church." And I was thinking, here's a couple that where they live, what they drive, everything about them is on mission. And that God put that in my heart in 96 or 97 when I was there, and I have never forgotten it. It's like, that's my goal, is to every person who lives in Salem thinks about where I live, what I drive, where I shop, where I get gas, becomes a part of my mission. And so that's what it's about. We've adopted, I think, 3 schools now. Again, I've got grandkids that are homeschooled. I've got grandkids that are in our Christian school. And yet we also freely support and encourage families that are in public school. And so what we do is we adopt these schools. We take lunch over to the teachers periodically. We sponsor them. We did a thing called Serve Salem a couple of weeks ago. We had 300 some people on 19 sites in the city, landscaping, coordinating food stuff, working at Corbin University, and the 3 schools that we've adopted. We were there in their schools doing anything and everything. It was the coolest thing in the world. We had a school that their band director kind of just bailed out on them and left. Just a horrible job. They hired a young guy that was in our church. I mean, he looks younger than the average junior hire, but this kid is so brilliant. So he goes to the school and finds out that they don't have anything for their marching band. Nothing. I mean, it's just mothballs. And so he tells us about it. Somebody did, I can't remember. So we took a check over for, I think it was like $10,000, and said, you know what? We want to buy your school an entire set for marching band. I think we have half of the faculty of that school right now that attends our church. And the reason is because they understand. It's like, wait a minute, these people love us. And so it turns people in our church into missional living, just like the Pearsons were in 1996. That image will never leave my mind.
Patty says from Arizona, I love his heart. No, this is very inspiring to those of us who are trying to figure out how to reach our communities. That is just, that's awesome. Lynn asks, she knows nothing about Salem. Is there much of a refugee population there?
Yeah, Lynn, it's increasing. We have Salem for Refugees. It's an organization that we help. We don't run it. We're part of it. And so, yes, we are one of the destination cities in Oregon for refugees, certainly many out of Afghanistan, but other countries as well. I'd say that, honestly, there's a couple of churches, one in particular, that is probably doing a much better job than us. They have their services in multiple different languages, but there is a refugee population, and we're trying to adopt families, and it just, we're trying to look at it more, if you will, singular, and but there is a growing diversity. Hispanics certainly big. We have a Spanish-speaking church that we're helping to launch, but we do have an increased number of Islander refugees. And we have a lot of Islanders in Salem.
Oh, wow.
That is really amazing. And one of the brothers in our church, a great evangelist, who's an Islander. And I think he has led so many to Christ. It's amazing.
So, are you as a church figuring out with what you've said? Are you as a church figuring out how to answer this need, or merely just supporting either on an individual basis or the churches around you that are already doing good work?
Yeah, I think we're probably more right now in the support role with other churches, maybe at least in particular one that is kind of taking a lead on that and developed and started a thing called Salem for Refugees. We gave them a fairly large gift to kind of launch, and we do some other things with them. So right now, I don't think we feel like we're going to be the point of the spear on that one. But there's others doing some things that I think our role is to support them and encourage them.
So your church focuses on mission to the city, and you've definitely explained very detailed in amazing ways how you and your church are doing that. But also you speak about missions to the world. So a lot of our pastors, especially with our recent workshop, how we mobilize, a lot of the feedback we got before the workshop was, how do we mobilize our congregations to take the mission to the world to heart? So what kind of advice do you have to them, and what are you doing to help inspire the congregation to take missions to the city, but also missions to the world seriously?
Yeah, we have 31 different partners, and we call them that. There are our staff that don't come to staff meetings. They are around the world. We have a goal to be with every one of our partners every 5 years in their locale. And some actually don't really, probably can't use us in that way. I just came back from Peru in some work we were doing down there. And we had a team that it was in Spain. We had a team that is in DR. So like a lot of churches, short term is fairly significant for us. And we encourage a lot in that area. We've also set some goals. We want to see 10 raised up out of our church. And I think we're actually going to exceed that have launched into mission around the world. Black Forest Academy and Spain and a score of other places. So I think, I don't know that we're doing anything spectacular that nobody else is doing. One thing that I kind of love what we do is we have home team sponsors. So every one of our team kind of has an identified team here in the church that looks after them, communicates to them, represents their needs to our church. There was a missionary a long time ago that made a presentation to our staff, and candidly, it wasn't all that impressive. And the staff kind of looked at me like, so what'd you do that for? Why'd you have him in here? And I was like, well, okay. Well, I was in the field a number of years later with this missionary, and I was utterly blown away at the brilliance and the impact that this missionary was doing. And I made a vow at that point that I will never put on missionaries the responsibility of proving themselves or wowing us of their impact. That's my responsibility. It is my absolute privilege and responsibility to know our missionaries so well that I can come back and be their advocate. Because sometimes when you come back here, maybe they're really, really humble people and they feel like trying to sell themselves just kind of feels dirty. Or maybe presentation is not their, great skill. This missionary that that I witnessed firsthand, I was like, this person is going to make more of a difference in the kingdom than you could ever imagine. And our staff, it's not our staff's fault. It's just our staff was kind of like underwhelmed. And I was like, God forbid that we ever do that stuff again. So that was a really, really kind of a seminal moment for me, that it is our responsibility, and we teach this for every short-term team. It is your responsibility to discover the breadth, the depth, and the beauty of this missionary's life and to represent them back to our church.
That is awesome. Your missionaries are very lucky to have you all as supporting them, because I know from experience that kind of level of support means a lot to them, more than they probably express. So we are nearing the end of our time with Pastor Mark. Do you have anyone out there have any remaining questions or comments? Now's the time. Put them in the chat. As I said, we have in the chat, we have the link to the church's site. You may feel free to go there, click on it, and explore. If you're in the Salem area and you're looking for a church home, I would encourage you to go to the website, click on it, and maybe fill out any connection card on there to talk to someone, or just come in on Sunday. Just so we wrap up, it doesn't look like there's any other comments. What are your services on Sunday? What are the times?
Saturday night at 6, Sunday morning at 9, and Sunday morning at 10:30.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark, for coming on and sharing your amazing inspiration. That I pray for all of you out there, that you feel inspired to live on mission that way, to think about your community that way. And I thank you for coming on today. So stay on, Mark.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Leo Calva says thank you.
Hey, Leo. Good to see you. Yeah.
All right.
Bye, everyone that I know and love.
Bye-bye.